Well, that's pretty much the rest of his ministry was debating that. But his conclusion was very clear, hindi. Hindi kailangan yan. Hindi kailangan yan. So, when he was with the Gentiles, kahit maaring nakakadiri sa kanya, but he would still do what they did, yung mga bagay na hindi labag sa biblical principles, in order to, by any means, save some. All right. So we have Jesus, the incarnation. We have Paul. What are some others? Other examples? Old Testament examples. Does anybody remember kung ano ang reaction ng mga kapatid ni Joseph pagdating nila sa Egypt? Yeah, they didn't even recognize him. He spoke the Egyptian language. He used a translator to talk to them. Do you remember what Egyptian leaders, yung high class, what they looked like? Yeah, the shaved hair. And then they wore a wax headdress that would melt over time as it was really, really hot in the desert. And then, yes, painted eyebrows. I don't know what that was all about, but yeah. So ganun and the straight kind of clipped goatee. Yep. So that's what Joseph looked like. Joseph contextualized. Now, is it wrong to wear a wax headdress? No. Okay. So when he was amongst the Egyptians, he wore what the Egyptians wore. And he spoke what they spoke as well. How about Esther? Some people are not okay with how much Esther contextualized. But yes, that's true. So I'm not quite ready to debate here whether she did those things to save her life or whether it was just okay to do them. But she definitely contextualized, very much so. How about Daniel? So we love to talk about how Daniel stood firm at hindi siya kumain ng pagkain ng hari. Didn't eat the king's food. But how often do we think about what the rest of his life was like? What was Daniel studying? Babylonian literature, Babylonian history, Babylonian gods, Babylonian sorcery, which was actually fairly good astronomy. Medyo magaling sila na astronomers. Hindi lang medyo. They were some of the best early astronomers. But they were learning those things because of the spirits, because of the gods. Now, I'm sure Daniel was able to differentiate, but he was learning those things as part of his education. That was part of his job. And it says specifically here, it says that he learned the language. One of the things they were taught is yung wika, yung lengguaje ng mga taga-Babylonia. Okay? And he served for the rest of his life as a high official in the Babylonian government. His mission was accomplished as he worked as a high official in the Babylonian government. By the way, you may never invite me back again, but why was it that Daniel couldn't eat any of the food from the king's table or drink any of the drink from the king's table? Did Jews not drink alcohol? Please forgive me, but the truth of the matter is they did drink alcohol. Okay? They drank fermented alcohol. There was no way of preserving grape juice back then. So why was it that Daniel didn't eat and drink? Yes. Offered to idols and killed in a way that was not ceremonially allowed by the Mosaic law. Okay, so hindi na dugo, the blood and the whole ceremonial thing. So it wasn't just a matter of pork and alcohol. I'm not promoting pork or alcohol, okay? I don't do either of those. But we should understand the actual context and be careful, because maaring matisod some of the people that we're trying to bring in by insisting that the whole thing about Daniel was specifically pork and alcohol. Okay, all right. Some other examples. I have the cheat sheet, so it's easier for me. Moses. What about Moses? I agree. Mm-hmm. Yep. So he knew the Egyptian language very well. Now, he forgot it in 40 years, but he originally Ready na siyang maging hari, kapalit kay Pharaoh sana. Yep, exactly. Some others. Nehemiah. How did Nehemiah contextualize? Yeah, he was a cupbearer. Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Ah. Okay, let's read that. Please read. I think this is the right one. Acts 17:28. All right, you have it. 22, not 28.
Then Paul stood in the midst of the Mars Hill and said, Ye men of Athens, I perceive that in all things you are too superstitious. 23. Whereas I passed by and behold your devotions, I found an altar with this inscription to the unknown God. Go therefore, ye ignorantly worship him the clear eyes.
All right. Do you know the story behind that? It's one of my favorite stories, and yet it's very few people know this story. Has anyone ever heard of Epimenides? No? Ah, you're in for a good story. Something like that. I'm sure I spelled it wrong. Epimenides. Many years ago in Athens, there was an epidemic. A really bad epidemic. Nagkasakit sila, marami ang namatay. You know that the Athenians, sabi naman ni Pablo, but we know that the Athenians, they had an ugali, that they would, anytime they heard of any god, wherever it was in the world, they would send an expedition to go find that god, get a copy of him, and bring him back to Athens. So Athens was just filled with all kinds of gods. And when they had this bad epidemic, yung mga taga-Athens, nag-sacrifice sila. Nag-sacrifice sila sa bawat isa sa mga Diyos-Diyosan na yon. But it didn't go away. It kept on going and going and going. More and more people were dying from this epidemic. Until they heard about this philosopher, a Greek philosopher, on the island of Crete, whose name was Epimenides. And they had heard, I don't remember exactly what they heard, but they heard something good about him. Kaya sabi nila, tawagan natin si Epimenides. So nagpadala sila ng barko, kinuha nila si Epimenides. Pagdating sa Athens, kind of weird yung ano niya, yung approach niya. Parang may pagkamayabang kunti or a little bit theatrical. Meron siyang mahabang robe at nakatayo siya doon sa pinaka-ulo ng barko pagdating. At pagdating, he just stepped right off onto the pier and parang aloof siya sa mga taga roon. And then, sabi ng mga elders, lahat ng mga elders of Athens were there to meet him, to greet him, and to tell him their problem. And how did it go? What did he do next? Anyway, he told them, tomorrow, he listened to their problems, listened to what was going on, and then he told them, tomorrow morning, I want you to meet me at the gate of Athens. And I want you to bring 3 things. I want you to bring stone masons, and a herd of half black, half white sheep. All right? And the elders said, why? What are we doing? What are we going to do? He wouldn't answer them a word. He just wrapped his cloak around him. And then dun sa Athens, dun sa templo nila, may mga niche. Parang butas sa bato. He went in, sat down in one of those niches, and he wouldn't talk to anyone else. And all night long, all the elders, inisip nila talaga, ano ba talaga ito? What is Epimenides up to here? But he wouldn't talk to them, he wouldn't answer them. So early in the morning, pag bagong liwanag, wala pang sikat ng araw, bagong liwanag, Epimenides and the elders met at the gate of Athens. And Epimenides said, "Elders of Athens, I've been thinking about your problem. It is clear to me that there has to be some God that you have offended. Pero hindi siya kasali doon sa mga Diyos-Diyosan dito sa loob ng lungsod because you've sacrificed already to all of them. So there must be some other God. But we don't know who this God is, and we don't know kung ano ang gusto niya, what he wants. And we don't really know for sure if there really is a God like this. So I propose an experiment. Ang sabi niya, alpasin ninyo yung mga tupa, the black and the white sheep, release them. Now, they had been kinulong sila all night long. So gutom na gutom yung mga tupa na yan. And then it was lush, fresh grass outside of the city gates. And the Athenians said, so he said, release the sheep, and wherever the white sheep lay down, mark that spot. We'll see if only the white sheep lay down. And if they do, then mark that spot. And he said, that's impossible. Imposible talaga. Because gutom na gutom yung mga tupa, ang sarap-sarap talaga ng mga damo doon, and then how would it would never be possible that only the white sheep would lay down and not the black ones? Pero sabi ni Epimenides, just do it. Do what I tell you to do. And so they released the white sheep, they released all of the sheep. And sure enough, after a few minutes na pagsabsab ng mga tupa, over there, a white sheep lay down. And over there, a white sheep lay down. And over there, a white sheep lay down. Pero yung mga black, tuloy pa rin sa kanilang pagsasabsab. So sabi ni Epimenides, mark the spot, mark the spot. At gumawa kayo ng altar, ng dambana, doon sa lugar kung saan naghiga ang mga puting tupa. Okay, so sabi, namangha talaga yung mga taga-Athens. Clearly, there was some sort of supernatural intervention happening here. And so, they built the altars, pero sa ugali ng mga taga-Athens, every altar has to have an inscription kung sino ang may-ari ng altar na yon. So yung altar kay Zeus, kailangan nakasulat. To Zeus, parang ganun. So they came back to Epimenides, sabi nila, anong pangalan ang isusulat natin, ang inscribe namin dito sa altar na ito? Sabi ni Epimenides, well, it's clear that there is another God, but we don't know who he is. If we choose a name for him, it may be the wrong name. And already galit na siya, baka mas lalong galit. Maybe he would be even more angry with us. But it's clear that he has condescended to parang sumunod yung Diyos na yan sa ating experiment. He condescended to doing the experiment that I asked of him. So maybe he would be condescending enough, that he would be understanding enough if we just put on there, to the unknown God. And so that's what they did. They inscribed the altars to the unknown God, and then they sacrificed those white sheep on those altars, and the epidemic went away. Gumaling na. Epimenides actually, himself, even though parang mayabag siya, pero he himself was really affected by that. And he started thinking, as a philosopher, thinking about that, and he realized, he came to the conclusion that this was the only true God. He actually became a monotheist. And he started teaching monotheism in Athens. And during Epimenides' lifetime, may evidence na ang karamihan ng mga taga-Athens, or at least yung mga leaders ng Athens, were monotheists. They didn't know his name. They never knew that he was Yahweh. But they knew that there was one God that was more powerful than all of the other gods. Until Epimenides died, bumalik naman sila uli sa mga Diyos-Diyosan. Until Paul's day, talagang polytheist, very, 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 very animistic sila uli. Now, how did Paul know this? He studied. He studied. He studied their culture, he studied their history, he studied their literature. Paul did not feel that it was a sin for him to study their literature and to look for redemptive analogies in that literature. But it goes a little bit further. So I have another text for you. Please read Acts. What did you read earlier? 17, 22 and 23. Please read Acts 17:28.
For in him we live and move and have our being, as also some of your own poets have said, and we are also his offspring.
Do you know who wrote that? Epimenides wrote that. Yep. Okay, one more. Titus 1:12. Paul, alam ni Pablo ang mga kasulatan ni Epimenides well enough to be able to quote him to the Athenians. When he went to Athens to be a missionary to the Athenians, he knew the Athenian culture and history and poets, or literature well enough to quote them to them. Okay. Titus 1:12, yes.
Titus 1:12.
Yep.
One of themselves, even a prophet of their own, said that Christians are always liars, evil beasts, slow bellies.
All right, so it's not a very, very kind description of Cretans, but do you remember where Epimenides was from? He was from the island of Crete. This was actually a saying of Epimenides. Like I said, parang kunting mayabang siya, pero so he wasn't afraid to be a little bit nasty to his own people. But what did Paul call him? Paul called Epimenides a prophet. Paul was not exclusive that only Jewish people could be prophets or only Jewish people could receive a message from the Lord. So again, some people, I mentioned this earlier, some people are a little bit worried, a little bit nervous about studying their legends, studying their myths, studying their literature. And I'm not saying to go and study the books of magic in Ephesus. Okay, Paul did not study the books of magic in Ephesus. They burned those books. Okay, hindi naman yun ang ibig kong sabihin doon. Pero the history, the literature, what informs them, what they know, what they understand. And God oftentimes leaves a redemptive analogy. And Paul was happy to use those. All right, we have a few more minutes left. Moving on to a little bit different. Oh. I wanted to show you this. Parang walang kuryente. Before we leave contextualization, please forgive me if this is a little bit different than the music that you are used to. But I want to give you a little bit of a sample. We talked about Jesus. Kuya Jerry said that Jesus was one of the examples of contextualization, right? Have you ever actually seen a Jewish worship service? Alam ba ninyo kung paano nagsimba sila sa sinagoga? All right. Well, first of all, let's look at how they sang. Of course, they didn't have YouTube back then. But this is a modern version of Psalm something. Anyway, Psalm 104. using mostly Jewish instruments. There are two instruments that they added, but most of these are actually Jewish instruments. There we go. They did not have double basses back then. That's a new one. That was added. Did they have drums back then, though? They did. They had hand drums. Did they have clarinets? No. But they did have wind instruments like that. Come on, where is it? Okay, that's enough. Ano po? So, we talk sometimes about hymns. We talk about the sacredness of hymns. And yes, absolutely. But let's keep in mind that when it says at the end of the Last Supper, ang sabi doon ay, they sang a hymn and went out, they were not singing Power in the Blood. They were not singing Rock of Ages. They were singing this kind of song. This is the music that Jews sang and still do sing. Okay? How did they do church? Do you know how they did church? So yes, they would have some music like this in their church. But do you know the order of service na meron sa mga Jewish synagogues ng panahon ni Jesus? Have you ever wondered how it was that Jesus, and especially Paul, was able to go to every synagogue all around the then known world, never having a prior appointment? Wala siyang appointment. Every time he was able to speak right away. How is that possible? Pwede bang gawin yan sa Adventist church? If I was a prophet, could I walk into any Adventist church and speak that Sabbath? Parang alanganin kayo. Could we do that now? No. Say again? Yes, there are places. But in general, we schedule ahead, right? If you're Ted Wilson, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, Paul was not. So, the way that they did church back then is basically they would come to the synagogue, they would sit on the floor generally. Then they would have the scroll of the Tanakh. So the Torah, Torah, Navi, and Katavim, the law, the prophets, and the writings. And they would bring it out, and the person that was reading it would have to have their head covered, kailangan nakatakpan yung ulo nila, and then they would kiss the roll twice, two ways, and then they would open it, and then they would have a reading. Basa muna sila sa Torah. Somewhere from the Torah they would read. And then they would have a second reading, this time from either the Katavim or the Navi, I believe, but I think it was generally from the Navi, from the prophets. Okay? They would have a reading from one of those, and then they would open it up kung sino ang may, kind of like what we did for communion. Kung sino ang may testimony, kung sino ang may message para sa mga tao, kung sino ang may verse, kung sino ang may kanta. It was more like a little bit more like a Quaker. Have you heard of Quaker church services? Yung Quaker church service, gusto nila na open yung Espiritu, yung Banal na Espiritu to move people. So Quakers sit quietly. Wala silang program. They sit quietly at naghihintay sila na udyukan ng Banal na Espiritu ang isang tao na to stand up and deliver whatever message the Holy Spirit has for them. Now, I'm not saying we need to go back to the Quakerism. I'm just saying na walang high church. Yung parang maseremonya na church sa kanila. It was a very simple way of worship. Simple and flexible way of worship. And Jesus and the apostles and Paul used that and even took advantage of that in order to be able to preach sa bawat church, sa bawat synagogue, all around the Mediterranean Ocean. So just something to keep in mind. Contextualized worship service, minsan nanibago tayo. Halimbawa sa Thailand, wala dapat pews sa Thailand. And actually, that's more like how the Jewish did it. They sat on the floor. Okay? Ganun din sa, at least narinig ko sa ibang mga Muslim, ganun din. Nakaupo sila sa mga mats. Is that true? Yeah. Okay. All right. Moving on to some other things now. A few more minutes. All right. Culture. When we talk about culture, there are actually 3 layers. The anthropologists make it into 4, but I simplified it down to 3 layers. So culture, when we use the word culture, ang tukoy natin yung mga panglabas. Kung anong suot natin, kung anong pagkain natin, kung anong klaseng bahay, kung anong klaseng hanap buhay. All of the things that we can see and observe, these are culture. And many times when we tell missionaries to study the culture, that is as far as they go. And those things are okay. Those things are good. We need to know those things. And kailangan makibagay rin. We need to be like them as well, as far as it's not against biblical principles. But honestly, this will only help you a little bit. This will only help you a little bit. Remember what I said earlier about the talahib? It won't get you down to here. That is only these things. The next layer is values. These are the underlying reasons, the underlying, what did I say here? Underlying beliefs, values, expectations, hermeneutical framework. Anyway, yung mas malalim na mga values nila underneath that. Then the deepest is the worldview. What is worldview? Values, medyo naintindihan natin yung values. Hindi sobrang mahirap na maunawaan ng values. But what is worldview? Can anybody give me a definition of worldview or an example of worldview?
It's everything that they see, they hear, and they feel around them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so deep that most people never understand their own. Hindi natin naintindihan usually yung sarili nating worldview. Okay? So, Yvonne, I would like you please to stand up, face the room, and then look at your eyes. You can't? Why not? Bakit hindi mo kaya? That's looking at my nose. That's not looking at my eyes. Okay, you can sit down again. Why couldn't Vaughn look at her eyes? Okay, you use your eyes to see with. How can you use the thing you use to see with, to see? Anyway, it's reclusive, not reclusive, recursive. parang back on itself again. Hindi mo kayang gawin yun. That is the same way with worldview. Yung worldview, yun yung deepest levels of understandings kung ano ang mundo, kung ano ang meron. What is reality? It's the thing you use para i-interpret mo ang buong mundo. It's the thing you use to interpret these things even. But it's deeper than culture. It's deeper than values. Kung sa computer, sa mga mahusay sa computer, the worldview is the operating system. Many people that don't really work with computers a lot don't even realize there is such a thing as an operating system. It's just the computer, right? It's just what it is. The computer is what runs the apps and all the other things, right? Well, yeah, okay. Maybe it would be better to call it BIOS. I don't know. What's deeper than the operating system? Okay. All right. So worldview. Worldview is deeper. Let's look at an example here. So level 1, actions and behaviors, rules of life. Oh, I did put it into 4. Let's just stay with 3. Okay. So actions and behaviors. One example could be eating rice. Dito sa Pilipinas, kumakain ba tayo ng kanin? Yes, of course. Now, what would be the rule or the tradition? Dito sa Pilipinas, may kasabihan, rice is life, or rice is food. Okay? What is the value? Why is rice food? Why is rice life? What is there valuable about rice? Can't live without rice. Why can't we live without rice? It's true. It's true. Poor nutrition? Okay. So what is valuable about rice that we love it so much? Not just love it, it's like its existence.
It's pretty abundant wherever you go.
Okay. 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 Okay.
What we've been eating since generation.
Been eating for generation after generation. Anong mga pagkain ang pwedeng pangpalit sa kanin kung talagang sa pilitan? If you have to, what can you replace? Kamote? Adlay? Corn? Bread, not so much. For me, yes. Cassava, balingoy? Yeah? Okay. So it has to be something that is starchy. Starchy and dry. Okay? Hydrates? Carbohydrates. Yeah, absolutely. Usually simple carbohydrates. Okay. And then what is the underlying? Something that's even deeper than that. Yung experience natin growing up. Like somebody said over here, was it you or Jerry? That all of our experience growing up, all of our life, all of our history, this has been food. Yes, it's been, yeah. Although we know that actually, ang rice ay galing sa China. Many years ago. Okay. So, para sa mga mangyan, an action that is very common with the mangyan is, anytime somebody does something wrong, you're supposed to dapat bugbugin, dapat paluin, you're supposed to forgive. And forgiveness means no punishment. You cannot forgive and still punish. For a Mangyan, forgiveness equals no more punishment. Okay? Yeah, it can be dangerous sometimes. So the rule of life for the Mangyan, one of two probably most deep core values for them is mabait. Pagiging mabait. For the Mangyan, mabait is much deeper than it is for the typical around the Philippines. Mabait is a way of life. It is one of the values that you're always looking for in people, and it's more than just simple kindness. What are something that's you cannot in their system, in their values, you cannot cause pain. Cannot cause pain, cannot confront, cannot show anger. No tribal war. Zero. Never in their entire history. Yep. Yep. The only time there has ever been a violent death among the Mangyan is about 5 years ago. May isang babae na nasirang utak. So mental illness, and she stabbed her children. The only time in Mangyan history that, any recorded at least, Mangyan history, there's ever been any kind of violence. The most violent they ever got was in World War II. Oh boy, out of time. In World War II, remember I described how the Japanese would come and they would kill the men, rape the women, and burn the village? They would set up deadfalls. Alam ba niyo yung deadfall? So hukay sila ng malalim, and then yung mga tulis, bamboo spikes, and then cover it over so the Japanese would fall in. That's the most violent they've ever gotten in their history. Okay? Mabait, pagiging mabait is a major, major core value to them. Okay? And where does that come from? That comes from a long history with legends, and I don't have time to tell you all the legends. They have been indoctrinated with these legends and experiences from when they were the very, very smallest. The children, hindi binabugbog, hindi pinapalo ang mga bata. Okay? They never hinahayaan yung bata na umiyak. So, of course, it causes some really bad disciplinary problems because the children can cry for anything they want to. Yeah. And they learn na ang pag-iiyak is the way to get whatever they want to. So for me, the system doesn't work very well. But for them, I am a maniacal tyrant that I would discipline my children. Yeah. All right. So let's look at another way of core values. Sa mga Mangyan, when, say for example, they say that they don't use clocks. So yung oras nila ay ganito, right? Alam na ninyo ito, right? So sunrise. Actually, where does the sunrise here? Oh, that way. Oh, I'm all mixed up. For the Mangyan, you always know where the sunrise is. Like for Europeans, at least traditionally, you always knew where north was, right? For the Mangyan, you always know where the sunrise is. So I'm a bad Mangyan because I've been here 4 days. Ngayon ko lang alam kung saan sumikat yung araw. So we would say maybe we're going to meet at this time. That's when our meeting is going to be held. So maybe 1 or 2 people may show up at that time. Pero hindi nagsastart ang meeting hanggang nandyan ang karamihan mga tao, and especially yung mga elders, mga mahalagang mga tao. The important people, the elders, and the majority. There has to be at least a majority of the people that are supposed to be there. Okay? So when they become Christian and have church now, and the conference or the local pastor tells them, church starts at, I literally had a conference official come and ask the entire district, and there were all different times, and he said, the only correct time to start Sabbath school is 8:30. You cannot start at 9, you cannot start at 8. 8:30 lang ang pwede. So, the Mangyan hear that and they say, okay, ang tama pala ay 8:30. What time does church actually start? It starts whenever the majority of the people get there, especially yung mga elders at mga matatanda. Yep. Okay, so now we have, forgive me, but this is real life. Now we have lowlanders. Lowlanders coming and wanting to attend church, doon sa mga Mangyan. And so they show up at, I don't know, 8:15, and they wait, and they wait, and they wait. Parang walang tao. Walang tao dito sa church, ah. Walang kumakanta, walang kahit anuman, walang family time, walang nothing. There's nothing. So it comes to 8:30, still nobody there. 8:45, still nobody's there. 9 o'clock, maybe a few children have shown up. At para sa mga taga-baba, ang tawag nila mga Tagalog, para sa mga Tagalog, they're offended. They're hurt. Because there's an agreement. There's a kasunduan. And the Mangyan are not respecting their time. So they're not respecting the agreement, and they're not respecting our time. So they stand up and they start doing church. So 2 things happen. First of all, the lowlanders take over the church service because the Mangyan are very non-confrontational. They will not stand up and say, hey, we already had this planned out. We already had our own way of doing church here. They'll just say, okay, you take over. And then the lowlanders typically think, oh, they don't know, wala silang alam, they don't have no education, they don't know anything. Okay? But what happens is the Mangin are now offended because their core value around this issue is togetherness. The other major core value for the Mangin is togetherness. And so both of them are offended because both of them think the other was disrespectful. Para sa mga Mangyan, ang mga Tagalog disrespectful dahil they started church. They made church more important than the relationships. They made the time more important than the relationships, than being all together. Yung mga Tagalog naman, na-offend naman sila because they think the Mangyan are being disrespectful because they didn't keep the agreement and they didn't respect their time. So both of them, so we see again, we see a cultural practice, and then we see an underlying issue which actually is the same on both. Both of them say the other is disrespectful. But there's something a layer deeper. For the Mangyan, the major core value that you need to respect is togetherness, relationships. For the lowlanders, the major core value that you need to respect is the agreement and the time. Okay? This is an example of why we need to get a little bit deeper, down to worldview levels. If we only work at the cultural level, we will have very little long-lasting impact. If we get to the values level, we are starting to have impact. But I promise you, over time, eventually, talagang may lilitaw na problema. At yung problema na yun ay hindi mo maintindihan. You won't understand the problem. And it'll be really frustrating to you. In fact, that is one of the signs that the problem you're facing is a worldview problem. Is when they're doing something and it just drives you crazy. And you can't understand, why do they do it this way? It doesn't make sense. Or why can't they get this? It just doesn't make sense. You're probably facing a worldview issue. And you shouldn't attack them over that. You should back off a little bit, take some time to learn more, to study deeper, to analyze, because you can only get here by analyzing. Ito ang isa sa mga dahilan kung bakit madalang, very rare that people actually get to this level, because you can't just simply observe. You have to observe many things and collate them, put them together to understand. I know we're running short on time. Last illustration of this. The Mangyan cannot save. They simply cannot save anything. They cannot save up. They cannot keep their capital if they try to start a store. They consume everything that they have right away. They also cannot work a steady job. So both of those things really get other people upset, other cultures that try to work with them, try to be missionaries, or try to do development projects with them. It really gets to people, and people get frustrated. I've had the government come to me and tell me how, these Mangyan. Yeah. But think back a little bit. I think back a long ways, actually. Okay, so let's go back to Europe. In Europe, meron tayong winter sa Europe. And for somewhere around 6 months, depende sa lugar, for 4 to 6 months out of the year, walang pagkain at walang panggatong. During summer, you have to prepare enough for winter. You have to save enough for winter. Now ngayon, not so much. It's not so critical now. But back when our culture developed, taga-Europe yung lahi namin, when our culture developed, it developed in a place that if you didn't save enough, patay. Patay ka na. And usually they were just barely able to save enough for their own family. So kung hindi naghahanda si Kuya Neil ng sapat, I prepare just enough. And then Kuya Neil is in an emergency situation. If I give some of yung inipon ko sa kanya, we will both die. There won't be enough for him and there won't be enough for me. My children will die because Kuya Neil didn't prepare well enough for winter. Okay, so please understand where our culture developed. is in that kind of a situation. So we as European heritage people sometimes make decisions that are really hard and feel to other cultures wrong. Feel parang madamot sa ibang mga kultura. And we need to be, paano sabihin ito? We need to be critiqued by that as well. Okay? But now let's go to the Mangyan. The Mangyan culture developed in a jungle. In a jungle, in a climate that was the same temperature all year long. And always may pagkain sa jungle, sa gubat. Always meron. Now, paiba-iba ang pagkain. Pero always may pagkain doon. Every single day, they would go out to the jungle, get the food, and eat it. They never had to save. They never had to prepare. They also never had to worry about trash, because everything they had was right out of the jungle, went right back to the jungle again. Okay? So, sometimes people say, parang bulag sila sa daming basura, hindi nila napapansin. Well, yeah. For thousands of years, they never had to look at trash. They never had to think about trash or collecting trash. It's parang bulag na sila sa trash. Okay? And then the same applies to a steady work. Para sa kanila, for a little while, just say, para sa kaingin. By the way, kaingin, hindi yan ang hanap buhay nila. That is just for special food, extra food. Their actual livelihood is from gathering in the jungle. Okay? But when they do kaingins, they will work really, really hard. Hindi kulang talaga sa sipag. Really, really hard to cut the jungle down. And then you have to let it dry. Kailangan patuyuin yan. So then they can wander off and do something else. They can go look for mushrooms. They can go look for yung mga ubod, ang iba't ibang mga palm trees. They can go look for, in March, they love looking for bees para magpuwag ng mga wild honey. I love doing that. And then when it's dry, then they go back and they burn it. And then they work even harder. Yung pagdudulok, alam ba ninyo yung salitang dulok? After you burn it off, there's a lot left. You have to clean that all up. And it's really hard work. It's even harder than cutting it down. And then, when pagtapos ng pagdudulok, then they can take a few days off and kind of wander around, do whatever they want to do. And then they come back and they maghasik. Now, pag nahasik na, there's nothing really to do until the rice is big enough that they can safely get the weeds out. And then you have to weed it. Okay, so you see the process. So palipat-lipat sila ng trabaho at hindi talaga wala silang culture of saving. So when we understand that history, we can understand the worldview behind why they don't really get saving. And why they cannot also say no to each other. Because, another example. I mean, same example, but another aspect. So halimbawa, meron akong pinatay na buswak, yung wild boar. I don't have a refrigerator. I cannot possibly eat that whole wild boar myself. So what is my refrigerator? Share it with everyone. But then when Kuya Neil kills a buswak, then he should share with everyone too. Okay? So when I ask him for some of his buswak, he needs to give me some of his buswak. Because he's going to rely on me giving him some of my buswak. And the same thing when they get to survival situations. Kapag may tagutom, they will always have to give to help each other. Okay. So I know it's time. We need to move on. But I just want you to see that culture is only the scratching the surface. Very surface lang yun. Under that is values, and the deepest is worldview. And again, when, not if, when you run into some situation where you just can't understand and it seems really, really frustrating, yun ay palatandaan that you need to go deeper to the worldview. And it takes collating their stories, their cultural practices, their history, all of the different aspects of their culture to understand the worldview. So it takes thinking. Now at AFM, we've developed a series of books that helps you through that thinking process. If you would like a copy, I can give you a copy of that. They're e-books, electronic books. But for right now, hanggang lang doon tayo. So we'll stop there at that point. Any questions, comments, alternate speeches before we take a short break and then do DBS? Going once, going twice. Soul, yeah. Soul the jury.
Trying to introduce to them what can happen I just remember some of the stories in Sudas. The one you said before, they don't have that fish in the can,
Mm-hmm.
something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the example of worldview there is some of the can, example, Alaska milk,
Mm-hmm.
that has a head of a boy, bata.
Oh no. Oh no. I know where this is going.
Missionaries brought them a can of fish.
Uh-huh.
You would think that
There's fish inside.
missionaries eat fish
Mhm.
by the time they open the can.
Right.
But when the boys these children saw a can that has a head of a boy,
Yeah.
they ran away.
They thought they were cannibals.
The missionaries eat boys.
Oh boy.
That's how I understand worldview.
Yeah. 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 Just reminded me of another story. A Hmongin from the highlands came down and worked for a Filipino, for a lowlander, and he fed him canned fish, sardinas. And he thought, oh man, this is great. Like, this is the best thing I've ever eaten. So before he went back up into the mountains, he asked, meron ba kayong binhi? Gusto kong itanim yan dun sa taas. Do you have seeds? I want to plant some of those up there. All right. Okay, so we're going to go to DBS now. And I think that we will pretty much